This is my life story by Margaret Mary Priest. The date, the 20th of November 2000. The place at Graham and Diane's. Now, first of all, I want to give some of the story of my mother. Is Madeline May McKinnon, born the 2nd of 6th, 1906, at Oodnadatta to Alexander James McKinnon and Mary Nee Walsh. She was the third to eldest of 9 children. After her birth, which she was the only one born in the hospital at Oodnadatta, as there was problems with her birth, and she was very sickly, and her family lived out of Oodnadatta at Charlotte Waters. So that's where she went, and then later on, the family having influenza, and the father was dying in Adelaide with cancer of the face. The family shifted to Kadina when she was 13 years old. She never had any schooling. When she became older, she went to work at different places, being a maid and milking cows. Then she went to Ardrossan to work at the hotel where she met Samuel John Martin, alias James Cooper. She became pregnant with me, her daughter Margaret, and she married Jim on the 9th of 10th, 1926. And I was born on the 19th of 1st, 1927. They were married at her mother's place at Wallaroo Mines. And later after I was born, they had another son who was born on the 13th of 1st, 1929. And his name was Alfred James Cooper. And he choked death while still in hospital. And then when Madeline was pregnant again, on her next baby, she wouldn't stay at Ardrossan Hospital to have him because that's where the other baby had died from. So she went to town to have him, and she had, on the 13th of 12th, 1929, had Roy Alexander Cooper. And when she came out of hospital, Jim was to come on bus and go back with family, but he missed the bus and got on the drink and took his life by hanging at the hotel on the 29th of the 12th, 1929, aged 33. And the reason why we found out later that he was so mixed up and took his life was he had been married to a Kate Nicholson at Mallawalla, and they'd had the hotel, and by what I found out, she was playing up and with all the different men that lived there, and she was a terrible person, and they did have 2 children, and Jim just put his hat on his head and rode off on his bike, and nobody ever heard of him again. Now, he was Samuel Martin, but he changed his name then to Jim Cooper, and that's as we knew him. So Madeline, with her 2 young children, which was me, Margaret, and Roy, stayed in Adelaide with her mother, Mary, and stepfather, Sam Stevens. Then for a while lived with her sister, Mary Reynolds, who had 2 children, Ray and Clayton. Mary had lost her husband, Alfred James Reynolds, at Ardrossan in 1927. He was 25 years old. Mary was 19 years old. Then Madeline and family went back and lived with mother, Mary, and Sam Stevens. Roy, as a child, was very sick, thought he wouldn't live, as suffered with pneumonia many times and spent lots of times at the Northfield Hospital. As a child, Margaret, I was always told my father died of war wounds. When I would have a fight with Cousin Ray, who was only 13 months older, would say my father killed himself. When I would cry and ask my mother, she would say, "Don't be silly, you know your father died of war wounds." When I was 13 years old, mother married George Owen Young on the 9th of 5th, 1940 at St. Francis Xavier's Cathedral. George was 46 years old and Madeline was 33. They went to live on Border Fence, New South Wales and South Australia, few miles from Cameron's Corner, as George was patrolling and looking after fence to keep dingoes out. And he said that Roy would go to Christian Brothers College, but after marrying him, Mum found out he had no money. So as soon as I finished school after grade 11, which was December 1940, Madeline came back to town and took Roy and me back to Border Fence. As we had been living with Grandmother and Sam, we went by train to Broken Hill. When we got there, had to find the hotel, and there was a sandstorm. So then we had to go and look for the post office and to get a telegram to let us know when we were to go on the mail bus. So we went by mail bus to Tibooburra, where George was to pick us up in the ute. But when we got there, George wasn't there. The ute had broken down, and there was nothing but rocks and things in the place to get to the back of the post office, which was shut. So we didn't know what to do. So went to a hotel, stayed there, and then George got there later to pick us up as the ute had broken down. So then we all left and went to the place called White Catch, which was the house on Border Fence. There was no electricity. We only had a wood stove. So Mum would have been there about 3 years or a bit over. And then when they sold up the horses and things they had and left there, they came then and lived at Strathalbyn, where they were doing looking after sheep, and Mum would be running around herding the sheep and that with Roy and with George. So she had it very hard. And then they were at Yongala for a while, living there. And then after that, they went to Mount Compass, where they were on a small dairy farm, which wasn't theirs, but they were just looking after. So Roy had to do all the milking, plus Mum, and they had hardly any money at all, once again, so they couldn't even afford to get Roy shoes at times. And I used to go there for holidays, and then after that, Mum came to Adelaide and lived in Gilbert Street, and after Gilbert Street, she saved and put a deposit on a house at 22 Ryan Avenue, Woodville West, where she went to live, and she lived there up till the time that she died. Now, a bit more about my story. First, I'll start off by giving some of my ancestors. My grandfather was Alexander McKinnon, and my grandmother was Mary McKinnon, nee Walsh, and my great-grandfather was William Walsh and great-grandmother Sarah Walsh. And my father was Samuel John Martin, alias Jim Cooper, and my mother was Madeline Cooper, nee McKinnon. More about my mother's family, from Alexander and Mary McKinnon. Their children were as follows in age. The first was Kathleen, and then it was William, who was known as Bill, and then Madeline, and then Mary, and then Fred, and then Margaret, always known as Marge, Charlotte, always known as Lottie, and Linda, and then there was John, who died at birth. And my father had 3 brothers. Their names were Stanley, William, and Leslie. And that's all I know about them. And then I married a Charles Sylvester Priest, known as Vic, on the 19th of November 1949. We had the following children. Marlene May, who was born on the 25th of October 1950. Graham Giles, born on the 14th of May 1952, Paul James on the 8th of January 1958, and Anne-Marie Margaret on the 3rd of August 1960. And each of them married the following. Firstly, Marlene married a Geoffrey Field, which ended in divorce, and then she married William Robertson. Graham married Diane Cook, Paul married Amanda Sexton, and Anne-Marie married Kenneth Harris. And the children from these were from Marlene was Sarah Ann Field and Benjamin Wintonfield. And Graham, although he had no children of his own, he was stepfather to Patrick, Thomas and Jessica. And Paul had Victoria Jane Priest and Vanessa Leaney Priest. and Anne-Marie had Belinda Ann Harris and Brendan Kenneth Harris. To give more history on my ancestors, well, the great-great-grandfather, who was Donald McKinnon, he married a Mary MacLeod, and they came from the Isles of Skye in Scotland, and they arrived at Port Adelaide on the 11th of March 1840. They worked at Hill River just outside of Clare, and my great-grandparents lived in Clare in Hope Cottage, Wright Street, South Australia. They were called Alexander McKinnon, born the 1841 in Clare, and he married a Harriet Kersley, and they had 10 children. My grandfather McKinnon, he was also called Alexander James, and he went north and was a drover and stock dealer, and he married Mary Walsh, born the 1881 at Virginia, South Australia. They went to live on stations out from Oodnadatta. He died on the 1919 in Adelaide from cancer on the face. At the same time, grandmother and family had the flu. They had to be brought into Oodnadatta with a nurse. Grandmother's baby was born but died as they all had the flu. After family of 6 girls and 2 boys went to Kadina to live with her mother, Mary met and married Sam Stevens. Then they shifted to Adelaide. She died 1964. My great-grandparents on my grandmother's side was named John Walsh, and at 37 years old he left Tipperary Island on the 4th of April 1857. He arrived Port Adelaide 16th of July 1857 with wife Mary and 5 children. They lived at Clare, South Australia. And then Sarah Ann, she was born at Bungaree Station, Clare, in 1864, and that's who he married. He died in 1903. He had been to Mass of a Sunday, and when he was going home on his horse, he called into the hotel, had a few drinks, and then riding his horse, the horse galloped. He fell off his horse, and he got dragged, and when he was found, he was unconscious, and he died. Sarah then came to live in Adelaide, and she died in 1954 in Adelaide. A little bit more I know about my father's side. His father was called Hugh Martin. He married Mary Ann Lee. She died the 17th of 3rd, 1911, aged 45 years. Hugh died the 30th of 1st, 1917, aged 55 years. They'd buried at Mulwala. All I know, they had the hotel there before my father, Samuel Martin. They were Church of England. A little bit more about my history. I was born Margaret Mary Cooper at Kadina, South Australia on the 19th of 1st, 1927. I lived at Ardross until I was 3, and then I can't remember much about my early years. I don't think I wanted to remember it, as after police coming to tell Mum that Dad had killed himself and I was with her, I just want to blank my early years out. As Mum said, I idolised my father. If he was home, wouldn't let her do anything for me, I would say, Daddy will do it. So after he died, we stayed in Adelaide and lived with grandmother and Mum's mother and stepfather for a while. And then we lived at West End for a while with my mother's sister, Auntie Mary, who also was a widow, with her 2 boys, Raymond and Clayton Reynolds. Clayton, who is 4 months younger than me, and I had to go to school at St. Joseph's, Russell Street City, before we were 7, as Ray wouldn't stay at school without us. He was 13 months older than me. Made my Holy Communion there, then went to live again with grandmother and step-grandfather, Mary and Sam Stevens, in Carrington Street, and then went to St. Cecilia School, Angus Street, taught by the Sisters of Mercy. Really, I loved it there, would cry if I had to stay home from school sick. Though I was hopeless at learning, did get my QC at end of grade 7, which was a lot of hard work and help from my best friend, Maureen Milligan, who was very good at schoolwork. She won a scholarship. One of the things I always remember of school days, when 10, in schoolyard I called Earl a silly cow. The nun heard me and I had to stay in for a week of morning recesses, so I never called anyone that again. Really enjoyed friends at school, and at age of 73 still meet 3 of the girls every couple of months. Used to be more of us, but a couple died, one in nursing home and Maureen lives Tasmania. In grade 7 was thrilled as first prize I had ever won for work at school. It was a beautiful big framed picture of Sacred Heart, as I was top in Bible history and catechism. Even though we had no money, was never hungry and always had nice clothes, as Mum used to make them. At the age of 13, in 1940, Mum married George Owen Young, and that's when we went to the Border Fence, and didn't come back until I was 16, and then went to Horn's Glove Factory to work as a machinist. Loved going to dances with friends, used to go at least 5 times a week, even though war years was lots to do, always plenty to dance with. At 19, met Vic, who really was Charles Sylvester Priest. I met him at a dance up at the embassy in Grenfell Street, where I used to go all the time. And got engaged at 21 and married at 23 on the 19th of 1149. Lived with Mum and Dad in Gould Street. Had Marlene and then Graham. And when Graham was 6 weeks old, shifted with Mum and Dad, plus 2 boarders, Bernie and Tom, who had been living with Mum from the time that Vic and I got married. So we all shifted to Ryan Avenue, Woodville West. And then Mum looked after Marlene and Graham while I went to work at Era Leather Factory, which was on Torrance Road at Cheltenham, making gloves. 20 months to get deposit for house, which was £900 I had to save, as the house was valued at £3,420. At that time, fixed wages were only £20 a week. We got the house January 1956. Picked out the one we wanted on my birthday, 19th of January. After living there for a while, Paul was born on the 8th of January 1958, then Anne-Marie on the 3rd of August 1960. The 4 children all went to the private Catholic school, Our Lady of the Manger, as even though didn't have much money, thought it was the best thing to do for them, as I wanted them to have a Catholic education and thought this way it may help them in later life. And when the boys were in grade 5, they went to St. Michael's College. And hopefully, even though it was a terrible struggle, it has helped them later on in life to achieve and to get things that they've wanted to do. I was really so poor because I'd done all this out of my housekeeping money. I got no extra money than helping to send them to school. I'd take them for walks and they'd often want an ice cream. I'd buy them an ice cream, but wouldn't have enough money to buy myself one, so would go without. And even when it come to makeup, I'd have to scrape the lard of my lipstick with a hair clip out of the container to get a little bit to put on my lips. But still, I don't regret it for 1 minute, because there wasn't much money around. So for our outings, we would go for a drive Sundays, take Mum with us and go down out of harbour and around where, when Graham was little, left him in the car and he pushed the starter button and we thought the car was going to go over into the water, but thank goodness Vic got there in time to stop all that. And then we would go to Mum's of a Friday night. The children would come there from school and we'd go to the drive-in, mostly with Uncle Bernie, because Vic used to go to the Speedway of a Friday night with his friends. Sometimes he'd take the boys, but more often than not they would come with us. And one time, poor Bernie, we went over Port Road, and right there on the corner, another car knocked into us, rolled out Bernie's car on its roof. We were all inside the car, couldn't get out. Graham scrambled out like lightning. He got out the front, and then Marlene did, and Bernie and Mum, but I couldn't get out because I was so pregnant on Paul, because I was only a few weeks off of having him, so they had to force the door to get me out, and everybody's saying, stand back, nobody light anything because it'll go up in smoke. So anyhow, we got out, and even though I spent 2 days in bed and was black and bruised, thank God Paul was born all right. And then sometimes most Saturdays after we got our house, Peggy, my girlfriend, and also John McGowan, who was Vic's friend, they used to come to our place at the Saturday night for tea, and we'd all just sit around and have a talk, and that was the big entertainment. And then later on, things got a bit easier. Children started to grow up, and I went early morning to work down at Badenoch's Bakery House. Used to have to get up some mornings at 2 o'clock, so I'd be back in time to do Anne-Marie's hair, because I think she was about 10 or 11, and before her, so she could go to school. And then we'd go around to different neighbours' place, and they'd have a sing-along, because that's all anybody could afford. We couldn't afford to go to restaurants, hardly ever go to pictures. We couldn't go out like the young people do today because there just wasn't any money. Memories I have from when I was younger, so around about 5-ish or so, well, with our outings, we were mostly just staying at home, and we would play Skippy and Chasey, and walk to grandmother's when I was living with Auntie Mary, and that was about all, because my mother was only on the welfare, and in those days that didn't mean like today that you get money in your hand. You only got tickets and rations and things for things. Like we could only have one pair of shoes a year, and that's all we could get. So we were very, very short of money, but not of love. And from then later on, from when I was around 10 years old, one of my biggest thrills was I was always getting around knitting with 2 nails and some string, because I dearly wanted to learn to knit. And at the time, Laurie Simpler was engaged to my auntie, Lottie, and they used to have the shopping of a Friday night. So they went out Friday night, and he brought me home a ball of wool and some knitting needles. Well, I thought I was the luckiest girl in the world, and he said, when you knit that wool up, and then I will buy you another ball if you say you will knit a jumper. Well, I did. I knitted my first jumper at 10 years of age, and he was such a lovely man. And then when it was my birthday, he and my auntie gave me this beautiful gold signet ring, which I still have today, and it had my initials on it, MC, and it's a heart. And for me to get a gold signet ring, who had never ever had anything at all, I huffed and I puffed and polished that every minute of the day. Yes. And then once a year, our big outing was, my mother used to take Roy and me to the beach, and it mostly worked out around my birthday. So, and then other times we would occasionally go for a walk and go to the gardens to walk through the gardens. And after Auntie Lottie and Uncle Laurie were married, they lived out at Dolly, and we would walk out there, and they had a snooker table, so we'd play snooker. And then some Saturdays we would go to the pictures. That's if Mum had 6pence to spare, as it cost 6pence for me and for Roy. We used to go to the Wakefield Street Picture Theatre, and you'd get 2 pictures for that. And if we were very lucky, we might have a penny to spend. So a cent would be the value to what a penny was then. But in those days, with a penny, we used to have the halfpenny tray, which was half of a penny, and the penny tray, all these lollies. It'd take us hours to pick them out, because we could get 2 real big lollies for a penny, or 4 smaller ones. So the poor shopkeeper, we'd be in there for that long just trying to pick out the best. The games we used to play was mostly with children around the other street, and we'd go from one side of the road to the other, which I know you couldn't do today, and we'd play Red Rover all over until it would nearly be dark. Then we'd go home, and at school we'd play skippy, hopscotch, basketball, which you call netball now. At the age of 14, I was at the border fence, so went nowhere much, only out fixing the holes in the fence to keep dingoes out, and riding camels. We had to ride a camel, or let's go with the camel buggy, 20 miles to get our mail once a fortnight, as the mail could come by bus from Burra and Broken Hill. When we went there was only one old man who lived there, So that was no company at all, and then we'd have to turn around and go back. And I hated being there, especially away from my friends. And while on the border fence, I think I cried every day as I was so lonely. I was supposed to be giving Roy his correspondence school lessons, which he wouldn't do for me, as kept going and hiding. He'd say he wanted to go to the toilet. I'd say no. Mum would say, let him go. I'd say, but he won't come back. And he wouldn't. I'd go looking for him. Perhaps an hour after, I'd find him in the dog's kennel or hiding amongst his goats. So, needless to say, Roy learnt nothing. But it was always my fault because I wasn't teaching him. That the little devil wouldn't do it. And if I got the ruler, I'd tap him, he'd take it and he'd belt me. So it didn't get far. There were some more memories about my school days. The teachers were really lovely, except for one. Can't remember her name. I think it was Sister Constantine. We had our school cases next to our desk. She came racing down, picking on my friend Maureen, and she fell over Maureen's school case with her long habit and veil tangled up and went for a roll down the aisle. Poor Maureen got the blame, and even though it looked funny, we couldn't laugh, as we would have all been into trouble. But after that day, no cases were allowed in the schoolroom, as they had to stay out on the porch. And one day my brother Roy fell in the yard playing football. She made him lie on a stool in the porch till I finished school. I could hear him out there crying, but she wouldn't let me go. So then I had to take him home, and one of the boys helped me home with him, as Roy had to hop, as later found out from doctors he had a broken leg. And once a week we would get 4pence, which is 4 pennies, but it would be about 8 cents today, to buy our lunch on a Monday, as the bread was always so stale by then. So we would get a double cut roll and a Kitchener bun, which was really wonderful. I still love Kitchener buns. I would often go without a bun to save 1 penny so I could buy a birthday present and a Christmas gift for my mother. Perhaps like a lipstick or some hair clips or some little thing. Roy was supposed to help me and save some money, but he'd spend all his money, then tell me how to put his name on the card, or he would give me a blood nose. Even though he was 3 years younger than I was frightened he would. Tell you some of the things that I remember about the war. The worst of the war, I was on the border fence. The only time I was pleased to be there, as knew they wouldn't drop a bomb on a house on its own for miles and miles. As in Adelaide, they had dug trenches in Victoria Park in case of bombing. When I came back to Adelaide at 16, I had to get work, so went to Horn's glove factory, as they were making gloves for the men in forces and industrial gloves, so then I wouldn't have to work in the munition factories. We had to have ration tickets for buying things, as only allowed so much, but we all had enough. We were at work when word came over wireless that the war had ended, so all places closed and had the rest of the day off. So most of us from work at Prospect got trammed to Rundle Street. It was just packed with people. We're all just so happy. It was really wonderful to be a part of it. And now just some of my memories that I have of some Christmas days. Christmas Day was a lovely day, as all the family came home to grandmother's for the day. It would be very hot and there was no air conditioners or fans. The big hot lunch, which was cooked in the wood stove, and the pudding, us children loved, as would be 3pence and 6pences in each serve. By this time the kitchen was big and we all ate in it, was boiling hot, as we only had the wood stove. So all of us children and some of the adults would lie in the passage to try to get cool. Then we would all have our evening meal. It was just so lovely, as Mum having 5 sisters and 2 brothers and all having children. The best thing was no arguments or fights, as they were a lovely family. But with grandmother being such a wonderful lady, how could they be anything but nice? Mum had no money, as was only on welfare. For Christmas would put our pillow slips at end of bed for Father Christmas. Mum would make us clothes, and a few little things. One morning I woke up, felt pillowcase, thought I had a rubber ball, which I wanted badly, but it was an orange. I was so disappointed, but didn't let Mum know. Roy at one time got a pair of second-hand football boots, which he really and truly wanted. He slept with them, I think, the next month. Changes in transport, and how lucky you young people are today. As when I was a child, if anyone had a car, they were rich. Even a teenager going to dances, a boy was doing good to have a push bike. If they had a car to take you home in after dance, it was Daddy's car. And now, well, most kids have got their cars at 16. And then we had the tram cars as well to go on, which we really enjoyed, and they took us everywhere, but they didn't run very late. I mean, you couldn't be out after midnight because there was no way to get home. Anyhow, we had to go everywhere on them, but then even though you couldn't get home after midnight, most things finished by 11 p.m, and you could walk home from a dance or pictures. As lived in City in Carrington Street, was sorry to see the trams go, as then there were buses, some double-deck ones and then other ones, and of course a lot more trains. When I was talking about trams, not like now that it only goes down to the bay, we could get the tram and we'd go all the way out to Enfield, Northfield and Colonel Light Gardens and down the port and all over the place. And then with trains, well, my first train trip to go anywhere was to Broken Hill in the 1940s. It was an awful trip. Just was so crowded and bumpy. The seats were wood and uncomfortable. I believe the difference, as I have just been to Broken Hill a few months ago by train, and the comfort was just out of this world. It was more like being in an aeroplane, to put your table down in front of you and all that. I really and truly enjoyed it. And Peggy Moore and I, we went to Ballarat by train in 1945, as that was our first holiday. We just thought we were just so great to be doing that, because not many people go for a holiday as far as Ballarat by train, because nobody had any money. But we were so frightened with our money, because never having any much, that I had a bag I made and I pinned it between my bras so I wouldn't lose it. And going over, I took off my shoes and I kept saying to Peggy, take off your shoes. She said, I can't. I was like, take off your shoes. Yeah, that's where all my money is. So we weren't game to even have a few pound in those days. And then with aeroplanes, well, the first time I was on a plane was to go to Kangaroo Island on my honeymoon. I was scared stiff, but it was only one of those little planes. I wouldn't look out the window, and the plane was very small, as that was in 1949. And my next then big trip by plane was to New Zealand. Oh, and that was really a lot of difference, because that was in 1982, so things had changed a lot by then. And then when we went overseas and went to Singapore, and then we went to England and that, well, I mean, I just couldn't believe from when I was first on a plane what had happened. So it was really a great experience. And as for the changes in appliances, well, just to note a few as far as just the refrigerator go, to have a fridge, then it was only an ice chest. Before that it was only hanging water bags that you had your cold water in. And then with the ice chest, you had to have ice delivered to you all the time. It would melt away. It'd be all gone before the iceman came back with more. And then when we shipped it down to Ryan Avenue, there was no electricity on, so we had to have a gas fridge. And then after that, we had an electric one. And what a blessing that was. And as for on the border fence, well, we only had an old safe to put our things in with wet bags hanging all around it. So, and another good thing too was the electric Mixmaster. Instead of having to beat with a hand beater, it was just heavenly to have a washing machine. Had first one when Marvin was a baby in 1950. Before that, boiling up the wood copper, then bucket the water into a trough, and then with a scrubbing board, wash your clothes, take you all day. And as for your whites and things, you'd put them in the copper, cut up all soap and then boil and boil and boil your clothes. But my gosh, everybody had wonderful white clothes. And the thing I think is one of the most wonderful things for me is the electric blanket, as I've always felt the cold. As a young person, always had cold feet, had to have water bottles, socks on, even used to wrap my feet up in a cardigan. And now, with the TV to sit and watch films and plays where we only had a wireless, which we would all sit around and listen to our plays and the news. And other thoughts on the changes is that thing best of all is having a lovely toilet inside, not having to go down the back of the yard day or night, and having lovely hot water and a nice bathroom and shower, instead of boiling up the copper and carting buckets of hot water to have a bath every Saturday if it rained, hailed or sun. The water would soon go cold, so you didn't stay in long. Thank God those things came first, and we didn't have them now, as having them and then going out without them would be the most terrible thing to put up with. Thinking of some of the highlights of my life, well, one was coming back from that rotten border fence and being with my friends again, and was able to work and get enough money to put that deposit on that house for the kids, as I knew it was like growing up, not having a house, always living with grandmother and old Sam, who wasn't very nice, as every Saturday he would get drunk, and when I would go out, said I should be home by 10:30am, and nothing finished till 11pm. Had to walk past his room to get to mine. He would yell out, "Who goes there?" And I would nearly pass out. I used to put a hanky in my mouth so I wouldn't sing out, and then I would hear him rowing at grandmother because I would be late, and yet I was always home before 11:30. And my next highlight was having my wonderful children and them all being well, and going to England and going on the golf trip at 22 years age with Peggy Moore, as in those days, very lucky to be able to do that. We had a wonderful time, even though one night I was so sick I thought I was going to die, but boy, it was worth it. When I say the golf trip, we weren't playing golf or anything like that. It was on a ship, and we sailed all around the Spencer Gulf, which was really a wonderful time. I think by memory it was for about 7 nights, but it was very good. I only wish they still ran it, though I don't feel like getting sick. I've just said some of my highlights, but looking back on things and reading what I've put down, some of the things that I could have done a bit differently. I wouldn't have married when I did, as looking back, Vic was too young and immature, and with having Marlene only 11 months after being married, he wasn't really matured enough to have coped with it all. But who knows? Things might have been just the same if I had waited 10 years. And I would like to have gone to school longer, but once again, mightn't have learnt much more. And things I would still like to do is to be able to keep going as I am, keeping healthy enough to go line dancing, yoga and going out. To have holidays, would have liked to have gone to Ireland, but if not, we'll be happy with doing holidays in Australia. A few of my favourite things are, well, first of all, food. I love most food, but I really enjoy a good roast, except one that Vic done for me years ago when I was sick in bed and the children were all young, and I had the leg of lamb to roast, and he says, "Oh, I'll do it. So I said, okay, so he cooked it, and then he sat the children down to eat it, and they kept saying, "Daddy, we can't eat this." Eat it, nothing wrong with it, eat it. Anyhow, they kept saying it, and he brought mine up to me. I said, "Oh my God, Vic, what have you done to this?" I said, "The gravy's dreadful." He'd left all the fat dripping in the pan and put the flour in it and made the gravy. So then he realised why the children couldn't eat it. And as far as drinks go, well, I just seen a good glass of water to anything. And with the music, well, I like the old-time music, as it reminds me of the days when I used to go dancing, which I really enjoyed, and even to now I do miss it. And with hymns, I do like Hail, Holy Queen, and my colours, yeah, I really like blue, so much that at one stage when I was younger, practically everything in my wardrobe was blue, and I even remember my favourite dress, and that was a blue dress that Mum made me when I was only about 17. I thought it was beautiful because she did some black beading flower up on the shoulder, and then I went and I bought my first hat that I had ever bought myself, and of course that was a beautiful little blue hat, all trimmed with black. Oh, it was the most wonderful thing. Still really didn't wear it that much. And I had to stop myself then from having so much blue. So now I've got quite a lot of different colour. In fact, I don't think I've got a great lot of blue at all. I still do like it. Well, I have got a sweet tooth. I do love all desserts, but my favourite is a lovely pavlova. And the restaurant that I really like going to, which I've been a few times with my friends and that, is over at Regency Park, because it is a training school, and when they are coming out of their time, they do all the cooking, and the waiting on you is absolutely beautiful. Place to go if you want to try something different. Now, with films, well, one film that sticks out in my mind from going back years ago was Mrs. Nineveh, which I enjoyed, but a later year was Ned Devine. And I would dearly love to see that again because it did have a lot of comedy with it, a good story, so a good laugh. And as far as sport goes, well, when I was younger, the only sport I played was sport, but I do enjoy watching the swimming and the aerobics, especially with the Olympics being on. And my TV shows, well, at this stage, it's All Saints, which I enjoy very much. I like reading romance books, especially the ones by Barbara Taylor. And my general activities, well, I like line dancing, which I go to Monday mornings, do a bit of it Wednesdays where I'm ARPA group, which is Australian Retired Personnel Association Club. We do it just between a few of us for an hour or so. Then I go Saturday afternoons out to Prospect and do it as friends pick me, so I am very lucky. And yoga, which I go to every Monday night, because once again, the teacher picks me up and brings me home, because with me not being able to drive, well, I'd love to if I didn't have such good friends. And I do enjoy walking, but I know I don't do enough of it, and my craft, which I go to every Thursday morning down at Sharing, which is at the Baptist Church, and for 9 years, so I don't think there's much more for me to learn, but it is one way of making me keep doing it. A few things that I forgot to mention before, that with my father, who was that when he was married to Kate Nee Nicholson, that there was 2 children. There was a boy who was Stan and a girl, May, who married and I was told that she was living in Queensland, was told that the boy had gone, he was a man at Bendigo, he was a hairdresser, and that he had died. Went to Bendigo, tried to find out, went everywhere and could not get no records on it, but perhaps, as far as I know, this Kate could have remarried and perhaps had the children's names changed. I don't know, because this is only a bit that I found out the last 16 years. With my brother, Roy Alexander Cooper, well, one of the hardest things I've ever had to do in my life was to go and tell my mother, had word, because he lived at Broken Hill, that he had taken his life, and the same way as our father had, by hanging himself. He didn't get on that well with his wife. There was a lot of hassles why he did it at the age of only 54. I will never know, and that's something my mother never ever got over. She was broken-hearted naturally because the only 2 men she had ever loved in her life had both done it, as she never really loved Giorgio and Young. So that was very, very sad. Now, in closing, I know I am very lucky to have thoughtful children who I know are always ready to help on so well with each other. And all my grandchildren are beautiful, and I know they will also grow up to be good people as the ones that are grown up are now. I am proud of you all, and all always in my prayers, and I love you all more than words can say. Bye for now, with all my love from Mum Nana.